Welcome back to Locking Horns. On this episode, we get to sit down with the Skaldic Eagle, Eirik Westcoat. He's a scholar, a student of Norse lore, a thinker, a poet, and a published author. For today's conversation, he is discussing with me the concept of an American Futhark.
Um, so you were talking to me and trying to explain over the phone that there's what you would say that you've discovered is the American version of the Futhark.
Okay, yes, I guess to introduce the American Futhark, like, one way to approach it is the starting point is to do something new and exciting with runes and make them, I guess, more relevant to the modern time, and yet
Okay.
paradoxically do this by going back to the real deep roots of the original Elder Futhark and of how it worked.
Right.
The Elder Futhark, when it was created, was a perfect fit to its language, and these first rune masters used the Elder Futhark to write words of their language in their native language, with runes that had names in their native language.
Right.
I guess in our modern runic revival, that's the piece we've all been missing. Today we've made I guess, fetish out of 24 names in a dead language.
Right.
And I'm certainly no less guilty of that than anyone else over the years.
Yeah, and I would definitely say that if I work with the runes, which is a rarity, I'm carving a horn. I'm carving into the horn as like a request from somebody.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted these runes on the horn, so my work with runes and physically putting them on something has all been magical in the act of doing it. So, are you bringing forward the American, if you would, version of the alphabet, and or the mystical, magical side that the lore says the runes have? Is that also a piece of it?
Yes.
Okay.
It's definitely meant to be both. It's meant to be
Okay.
magical, and fully communicative. It's better in a sense than using Elder Futhark for modern English. So that was one root of this is, I guess, the ways that Elder Futhark is used to write modern English are very frequently. It reduces the problem is it reduces the Elder Futhark to an alphabet.
Right.
It becomes a question of the modern rune writer is frequently implicitly or explicitly taking the approach of what rune can I use to stand for such and such letter.
Right. Okay.
And this is
Oh, the Mani's rune looks like our letter M, so we're going to put it there.
yeah, that's part of it. That's not not where the terrible example is. But yeah, the examples then become when you try to say write things like, for instance, okay, if you write, people say, okay, what rune can I use to stand for the letter V? As we would see in a word like village.
Right.
And this is ultimately, that's not a traditional approach to using the runes, and I would consider it even somewhat disrespectful to the runes, because the runes are meant to stand for sounds,
Right.
not letters.
Right.
So as the ancient rune masters wrote using it, they learned this system of 24 staves and all the sounds that went with them, and they learned them through the names of these sounds.
Right.
And so every time they had to write a word, it would be a case of like trying to match out analyzing the various sounds in the words they're speaking and which of these runes matches that sound. There was no recourse to anything like letters, and even certainly not anything like dictionaries, which they didn't have.
Right.
Imagine, say, a giant early rune master's dictionary would just be like a big tree trunk or something with endless rows of runes carved into it, and no, not very portable.
In about 50 years, I'm going to need to find another tree, because this will have grown over.
So then And I can even see, actually, on some, I guess, the what you're wearing now, I can
Yeah.
see some of it. So it looks like modern English.
It is.
Written
It
in
is.
runes, yes.
Prime example of what we were talking
Okay,
about.
looks like a Tolkien saying, I believe.
This is interesting enough. This hoodie is one of the tattoo schemes from one of the gods in the video game God of War Ragnarok. So this and the black hoodie I have has another tattoo scheme of another of them. They were gifts to me, and they're. But you're right. It's an example of the runes being used in a way to portray English
But yeah,
English letters.
and I can see from it, it's just like, it's basically an alphabet substitution. It's exactly what I said earlier.
Yeah.
We want to take something written in alphabetic English and see, okay, what rune can I use to stand for this letter?
Right.
But and so the opportunity with the American Futhark is to revitalize modern, I guess, rune culture and runic writing by returning to those roots where you can write with exactly one stave for each significant sound in the language.
We're recording.
And with all those, and the result, so that's, I guess, one approach to this that I came for this
Right.
I guess that's now what led me to that. In my own case, I've been working with runes in like Elder Futhark and Younger Futhark and the Anglo-Saxon Futhark, and in like carving them for magical inscriptions. What I really liked about those systems was, in fact, that link between stave and sound.
Right.
There was a case you were carving the rune, and it was like a concretized sound. You're taking the sound, something like floating in the air, and like thump,
Right.
plopping it down quite directly onto there. And so I ended up for such inscriptions, I would compose things in Old English or in Proto-Germanic because their rune systems could be used so exactly
Right.
with the sounds, and avoided modern English for that reason.
Right. No, I think any time that I've put runes to paper, it's been in modern English. Simply because I think it was an easier way for me to understand it, but I lose the understanding of what they are in the act of doing so. Never thought about it that way.
Yeah, I think one way I would characterize it with, and a lot of modern English speakers, they're famous for not learning foreign languages.
Right.
So I think I like to describe the English alphabet as the world pulled over your eyes to blind you to the truth about how your language actually sounds.
Right.
And or if you want to be more uncharitable, like for the English alphabet, is people's relationship with the English alphabet might be like Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah.
So we don't realize how much it misleads us about the way our language
Right.
actually sounds, and I guess how bizarre it is, because if you were, say, if we didn't have the English alphabet and its hundreds of years of convoluted spelling traditions, you could never propose a spelling system like that for any modern language, for anything whatsoever. It would be impossible. If you proposed something like that, and then you're going to teach this to children, it's the equivalent of modern English alphabet spelling, and to teach it to children, it would be rightly called child abuse, to make people learn such a convoluted system. It can only be learned today only because it's a sense of it's always been there.
Yeah.
But so, in that case, it's terrible, but we're stuck with it through the, I guess, the extraordinary weight of the Latinate alphabet tradition. But we don't need to do everything in our lives with it. I mean, it's become, and in a way, it's also become quite mundane and profane. Like the alphabet's used for things like writing tax codes and internet memes. Emails.
Irrelevant laws.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we still writing this one? Does this one even work anymore?
So what one purpose of the American Futhark here is to carve out a way to do something different, to like resacralize the parts of our lives, and especially our heathen practices,
Right.
that we want to get back to, get more closely connected to the gods and bring more of a harmonious way of doing things, and especially to again bring back that way of how the original rune masters wrote with their runes. So the American Futhark allows
Re-sanctify the the magical aspect of what the art is.
yes.
Okay.
And so here
But you're right. So many people, all of us, kind of like blinded by what you're saying with the, there's how we might disrespect the origins of what they are for what purpose they were created.
Okay, like, I guess, yeah, to give an example of with some of the writing, like see on the shirt here, it says, "Not all who wander are lost," and it uses Othala to spell both "not" and "who," but the sounds are completely different.
Right.
Like for instance, like if you're really going like by the original sound of it, one would write "who" using the Uru's rune, and let's see. Not might be used the Ansu's rune, actually. You would get very different things if you were trying to do them phonetically.
Right.
And so the new American Futhark system is to just make it instead of like, because when you see with that kind of writing, there's sometimes it goes a little bit of phonetic stuff, like we can now use the Thurasaz rune in place of the TH things. And this gets a little closer to
Right.
the whole system of so. It's like I would say it's a few actual phonetic things duct taped, or depending on if you refer to, you could say duct taped, MacGyver rigged, or jury rigged.
We don't know how it's holding together, but somehow it's holding together.
And I figure, why go half measures? Why not just go all the way back to the straight phonetics?
Right.
Because in this case, with the American Futhark, that necessitated having 33 runes, as that would be,
Okay.
I guess, drawing on the best linguistic science, I guess the absolute minimum for American English.
Okay.
Yeah, to get to the number of, I guess, sounds, or in this case, the technical term phonemes, and thus runes, to get it below 33 would involve doing some rather contradictory or ugly things.
Right. So phonetically, the American Futhark that you're bringing forward is 33 characters.
Yes.
Show me.
Okay. Yes, I do have one on a stave here. Let's see. I don't know how. Let's see. I'm not sure what the field of view here is on this.
You have the whole field of view.
Carved into here. Okay. Going with the sequence, starting from the beginning, and like to give them names in modern American English.
Yeah.
Just as the Elder Futhark had names in its Proto-Germanic. They start fee, ooze, thorn, os, ride, charcoal, gift, win, hail, need, incense, year, eagle, pear, zenith, sun, two, birch, elk, man, lake, ing, day, or, ul, village, ship, earth, genre, thataway, cup, gem, ash. And to bring up a point here, I've mentioned been talking a lot about the Elder Futhark, but what the American Futhark comes from is actually a reform of the Anglo-Saxon Futhark.
Okay.
The Anglo-Saxon Futhark, I guess it was into use till maybe about 1,000 years ago, roughly or so. But it's a little closer to modern English, and so that's and that made it the ideal starting point for this reform.
Gotcha.
And some may notice that the order of the staves and their shapes through the first 24 are the same as for the Anglo-Saxon Futhark. And in the final 9, let's see, the final 9 uses another 5 shapes out of the Anglo-Saxon Futhark.
Okay.
And there's 4 that are different shapes that come from. Let's see. They're all the other shapes all do come from historical systems, one way or another.
Gotcha. So they've been around before. They're not
Yes, there's a
modern construct.
yes, there's no new stave forms.
Okay.
One of them is from Cup is from the younger Futhark
Okay.
in the Norse, for instance.
Awesome.
And
So, how would we use it? What would be its proper, respectful usage in, let's say, our heathen practices?
okay, that can run. That can go in a lot of different directions, but for the very beginning, just like to carve and write things for ritual, for instance. Maybe one way you could, let's see, at least one kind of ritual would involve. I think I did something like this at a thing last year. I guess there was a vase to the gods, and I think one of them will put on a little piece of paper, maybe write some kind of dedication to the goddess, or some kind of let's see, or a bloat or a spell or some kind of prayer, and like write that out on runes.
Yeah.
And it goes into the offering bowl, and I guess the offerings were then burned in the ritual fire later.
Right.
So I remember I wrote mine using American Futhark.
Okay. So, like, moving forward, kind of your goal is to get this introduced to, well, I guess what we would call the American heathens.
Yes.
Yeah. I know that you have some other books that you have done on poetry, and I highly suggest that you look into his things. I will show you some of those, but that's later.
Again, on the subject of writing, I'll go with 2 more, I guess, the practical examples here. Okay, these are a pair of walnut wood sticks carved and painted. They're in a particular heathen ritual. They can like tap them together to make noise like that. Go with, let's see, one at a time here. The one in red here. Okay, this is the word holy. Okay, and so it's written with these particular runes, like breaking down the individual sounds. The first one, something like is like. Yeah, it's hard to make the sound we think of. The sound we typically think of with the letter H.
Right.
Or in this case, what the word hail starts with. So in that case, the initial sounds of hail and holy match. So we start with a hail rune.
Okay.
And then in the middle you get. We'll come back to the middle here for the beginning, because that's one of the tricky parts. We get to. I'll explain that, but we'll first go to then here near the end of holy. That last syllable, li. That first part is like the sound is in the beginning of the word lake. So we write the lake rune there, and it ends with the word holy. Ends with an e. And that's the sound as in E as in eagle. So then an eagle rune. And okay, perhaps the most one of the things that can be a little tricky, but is easy enough to pick up, is certain vowel sounds. This vowel sound holy. That's the sound O. And it turns out it's written here with 2 runes, because in modern English that sound it's like and like O. In like grade school they'll refer to this as long O.
Right.
And it's actually something that the linguists call a diphthong, and it's composed of 2 sounds. Because if you try to hold like with just you can't actually hold it as a single sound. Like for instance, to come back to the end of here with the E for eagle sound, you can go E, and you can continue that same exact sound for as long as your breath runs out.
Right.
But if you want to try to like lock on the O, if you try to lock that down, you'll discover it's a bit of a slippery, greased weasel, because it'll be one sound or the other. Because there's actually it starts in one place and ends up in another. They're fairly close. It may be difficult, but something like oh.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you try to extend it out, like you may have heard, like shifted there in the middle.
Yeah, it tapered off.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, with those two, the first one matches. It matches the or sound. We're fairly close to that. And then the second one, the ul sound.
Mm-hmm.
At the beginning of the word ul.
Okay. That's really cool.
Okay, and the next one here. Let's see, I don't know if you want to, if you've seen enough, depending on how your memory is split, if you want to take any guesses, what words spelled here?
Spirit.
Not quite. Okay, just as a note here, I guess it depends. Like some of the, like for the most part, the way the American Futhark runes is, for the most part, they're not trying to trick you.
Right.
So what you recognize from the other systems is going to be fairly close to what it is.
Okay.
So like there's I have to look. I'd have to. Yeah, I don't think there's any that are going to be like this is okay. This is a completely unexpected sound value, or at least not many.
Right.
So here, like the first one, this is in this case this is the sun rune.
Mm-hmm.
So this starts with sun here, and then we get another of those diphthongs here, like elk, and then incense. Because this is another one of those, like this is what we call in modern English what they call in grade school the long A, long A
Mm-hmm.
sound.
Okay.
Which is really two sounds, goes something like A. And we have the sound is in cup here. Ride, earth, and then day. So that putting them all together, this is sacred.
Okay.
And so everything with the American Futhark is meant to work phonetically in that way.
Right. Well, there you go. That's really, really cool. The difficulty is memorizing the alphabet and like taking the steps to make the transition in your mind.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it can take a lot of practice. Certainly, with a good dictionary, one can. I do have some. Yes, like a free guide. I don't think of it. Do I have the table? It's on the website.
Okay.
But there's, and with all of the phonetics are specified. So you could go if you have a good dictionary. You could look up. Like dictionaries will give you pronunciation guides for things, and one way to help learn the system is you could go through the dictionary pronunciation guides, and it can they correspond fairly directly to American Futhark runes.
Right.
And part of that process is then you'll discover where your own speech, that can be a tricky part, where your own speech will actually differ from what's listed in the dictionaries.
Gotcha.
Because everyone will find something that's a little bit different than what's in the dictionaries. But it will vary from person to person. Yeah, but by and large, there will be a lot of it will match up rather exactly. But so part of this is it's not. So when I say there, you'll learn where your speech is different. It's not the purpose of this to make everyone write everything in runes exactly the same way. the way they write with the American Futhark, it will differ. It's meant to correspond to how they speak things. So how you write certain words in runes may be a little different than how I write them.
Right.
If we we don't need it. It doesn't need to be a system where everyone's all writing the exact same way. We have the mundane alphabet. We want to write things where it's all the exact same spelling.
Right. Well, we have, as a society, gotten to a point where people don't know how to spell things and they don't know how to write them down.
Then, of course, what I just said about spelling differences, it can be overstated. Quite a lot of people will. There will be quite a lot of broad agreement in many cases between different people. There are different people's runic spellings of the same text may well be. In some cases, it may match up exactly. In other cases, like the differences may only be fairly minor.
Right.
And that's part of the purpose of the system is, in fact, to promote and in many ways encourage and even force a confrontation between the individual rune user and speaker with their own language. It's meant to bring you face to face with the reality of how your own language works and the sounds of it.
Right.
Because, I mean, that's an absolutely necessary step for like using one's language for like rune magic galters and rune chants.
Right.
That's in order to get the best and most out of them, you really have to have that confrontation with your own language. And it's easier than I make it sound by using the word confrontation.
Well,
but it does take some work. It's more.
It's like you're going to have to recognize it. You have to self-recognize it and say, hey, this doesn't work in the way that I would like it to work. But
exactly.
Here's a way it can work.
And then also things like it doesn't work in the way you expect it to work. I remember I discovered it was as I was preparing this, I discovered one of the ways in which my speech does differ from the dictionary stuff. And at first I was all confused looking at these pronunciation guides and like, hey, this doesn't look right. That's not how these words are pronounced. And then I discovered that was actually one of the major variances in American English.
That we're not saying the words the way that they're phonetically supposed to sound?
Well, I know. Let me rephrase that. I guess in this case, to give it its name, it's what the linguists call the cot-cot merger.
Okay.
That's cot, C-O-T, and cot, C-A-U-G-H-T. And for some people, from what I understand, roughly, at least according to linguists, perhaps as maybe 50 or 60% of the American Native American speakers, these are pronounced differently. I guess if you've just heard me say them, they sound exactly the same. If I focus really hard, I can pronounce them differently in the other fashion.
So C-O-T, as in a cot that we lay on.
Yes.
Cot. Caught.
Okay, so you say them differently.
Yeah.
Okay,
But
say them again, yeah.
Caught. Caught.
Yeah. Exactly.
But I see what you're getting at is they can be said differently based on where you grew up.
Yes.
Right. And how you learned to speak. The thousands of different American accents that we have.
So in your case, those two words, like the vowels in them, one of them would be the os rune, the other one would be the or rune.
Okay.
And for me, in my normal speech, I would just use the os rune for both of them.
In place of your normal speech, you would use the same rune. Where
Yes.
in place of my normal speech, I would do it differently.
Yes.
Because the characters represent the
Sounds. Yes.
That's a different way of training your mind to speak. Like, I spell my name and I know how to pronounce my name in the American alphabet. But is the American alphabet doesn't back up the sound of the character. Not all the time.
See.
Like for the letter S.
Yeah, the English alphabet, the way it's spelled, the correspondence between sound and pronunciation is often very strained.
Yeah.
And like you can have several different ways, like the same vowel. For instance, the vowel at the beginning of the word away.
The word away?
Yes,
Okay.
that's spelled with an A there. It's like the vowel goes something like
Yeah.
but in the word but or up, it's spelled with a U. In I think the word zenith, it's spelled with an I at the end there. And then I think there's also an example where you can find where it's spelled with an O in some cases, and then it's in another case it's spelled with an E. Exact same sound, but it'll be spelled with an O or an E. There's probably somewhere out there where it's spelled with a Y as well. So you get to ultimately like protect for that vowel perhaps 6 different ways to spell it, and there may be more if you use combinations of vowels and the silent letters in the language. But in an American Futhark approach, there's exactly one way to spell that vowel, and that's with the earth rune.
Right. Okay. It is really a little mind-blowing because I have never thought to think about our alphabet in that way. And with this transition of people who are practicing Norse paganism utilizing a runic system for either decoration or magical purposes, or simply just to transpose a letter in the runes, this gives, a more phonetically sound option to work with.
Okay. Well, I did want to say I can say a few things about what led me to, I guess, create the system. As I said, the other thing that led me to create the system, I mentioned at the beginning about the of like writing things and getting that exact correspondence between what you write and how it sounds.
Right.
The other end of it is what may be a surprise to some, actually poetry.
You do have a history in poetry.
And so this was a case of, I do have I don't want to go too much into a tangent on the academic article that's being prepared in the pipeline for publication. But to briefly summarize, the idea I came up with is that, that the order, the Futhark order and the names of the runes are still an unexplained mystery for the system. It's like, one of the big questions is like, they clearly were influenced in coming up with writing. They were clearly influenced by the Romans or Etruscans or Greeks or whatever, if you prefer, but mostly it's thought the Romans, that they got the idea of writing from the Romans. But they didn't copy the alphabet order, and then they gave the staves names that no one really knows where it came from. So like, why didn't they copy the alphabet order? Because as writing spread all around the Mediterranean basin, that was frequently exactly what happened. People just parroted whatever writing system they were inspired by.
Right.
But instead, the Germanics, they did something completely different. So my approach to explaining that is that perhaps they didn't have the alphabet order to parrot at that time. Whereas my view is that I think I'm the first person to propose such a thing, that the Futhark order and the names of the runes preceded runic writing, perhaps by several centuries, and that they would have been developed by the early Germanic speakers because as a way to to teach and promote and codify their system of alliterative poetry. So the kind of the traditional poetry that we see in like the Old Norse Voluspa or like Old English Beowulf. This is a poetic form that goes back to very early Germanic, probably around, because we don't have written records from this time, maybe around, perhaps as early as maybe roughly 500 before the Common Era. But at some point, like, yeah, this kind of alliterative poetry, which is built on matching the initial sounds of stressed words and syllables. I mean, this doesn't always exist. This didn't always exist, like back into the infinite darkness of human history. No, it had a very definite beginning, roughly around perhaps 500 before the Common Era. And if you like before that, they had some other kind of poetry system, which very likely resembled what we see in like ancient Vedic or ancient Greek. Something roughly comparable to that, but we know what happens is eventually the alliterative poetry arises in these Germanic speakers. It would have been a very unusual thing at the time, and once alliterative poetry arises, like it becomes an important part. This is for the first time in this poetry. It's important that they match the sounds of words become very important. So they have to match. They arrange it by matching the sounds of initial words. To give a line, an example of an alliterative line. Let's see if we go from my American English rune poem. Okay. Fee is a force that fuels our world. And so in this case, this is a match on the sound that starts the words fee, force, and fuel. So it's the same sound starting all three of those.
Gotcha.
And
so the fee is the character.
Yes. And so when this kind of poetry arises, maybe about 2,500 years ago, it's a completely new thing. And so in order to teach and promote this system, my view is that they would ultimately give names to all the sounds of their language so they could discuss the poetry and teach it. Because if you take that line, fee is a force that fuels our world, I can say that now with an American Futhark, I can say I've alliterated on fee. Or with another line, like say, let's see, but better given with abundance inside. That has two that match on birch. And so I can use the names of the sounds as a way to discuss what I'm alliterating on.
Right.
That's my view, that these early poets would have hit upon a desire to have such discussions, and like having absolutely nothing, they would have to name their sounds, perhaps for the first time in their culture's history. And they would go through and come in, of course, because at this point, having no writing whatsoever, they would have to give their own names to it. And not knowing the alphabet at this point, they would have to come up with their own order for this. Because once they name all these sounds, they'd have to give them an order in order to load them up with a lot of mnemonics, because they would have to teach and transmit this from one generation to the next without any way to write it down.
Right.
So that's where I think it comes from. You see the runes, and they do seem to have some very strong pairwise correspondences in the Elder Futhark, like Fehu and Uruz. It's like domestic and wild cattle. Thurisaz, Ansus, both kinds of supernatural beings. And the pairs go more or less through the rest of the Futhark. Some pairs are clearly seem stronger pairings than others to us. Perhaps some of it's a little worn away at the edges by the time it reaches us, but there's enough to see that there was certainly something there to begin with.
Very cool.
And so I guess they would, and naturally, of course, being poets, they would use their own poetry as a way to transmit and codify the system. And that's my view on why rune poems even exist. But the surviving rune poems are ultimately, although it's been it goes nearly like 1,500 years, perhaps later, and they've gone to some slightly different purposes, that these what we see as like the Old English rune poem and the Old Icelandic rune poem. These are like perhaps the last echoes of a rune poem tradition that would have went back to the beginning.
Right. Well, excellent. I hope to look forward to a book of yours. I have a few. So if you put out a book like encompassing this thought process, this
Nice.
this alphabet, I'll definitely enjoy it. So we're gonna.
So yeah, there will be a book coming. I won't make any projections as to when it will arrive.
No,
The
like
book
I
is
said, if.
definitely coming.
But I expect you to, knowing you. But I would have never have thought to think about it that way. But I appreciate you bringing this forward, and you'll see more coming soon.